Hello, I'm Aiib. Welcome to Rappler Talk. What's in store for Philippine-China relations in 2016? These past few weeks offer mixed prospects. Before the end of 2015, the Philippines pulls a surprise by joining the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, seen as a rival to the US-led World Bank and the Japan-dominated Asian Development Bank. But at the start of 2016, the South China Sea dispute again complicates ties as China lands civilian aircraft on the disputed Fiery Cross Reef in the Spratly Islands. Today, we discuss what these developments mean for Manila's complex relationship with Beijing. Joining us is Dindo Manhit, president of the think tank Albert del Rosario Institute. Welcome to Rappler, Dindo.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's start first with the South China Sea dispute. On January 2nd, China announces it landed a civilian aircraft on Fiery Cross Reef, and immediately Vietnam, the Philippines protested this. What does the move mean? You know, China keeps saying this is for civilian purposes, but what exactly does it mean?
We have to go a few months back that we have seen through different sources like the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative of the CSIS of the United States have shown us how some of these reefs have been transformed into possible military facilities, landing areas. And suddenly we start the year, a civilian plane is landed. So for me, it's really about all this reclamation is about China's expansion of its maritime footprint in the South China Sea. So what does it tell us? That when you build and transform these reefs into ports with military facilities, communication facilities, landing areas for not only for civilian but even for military aircraft. It basically threatens the freedom of navigation and the freedom of overflight in the South China Sea. So basically, those areas could be or would be controlled by China.
Right. And then yesterday, we saw Philippine Foreign Secretary Albert del Rosario warning of a possible air defense identification zone, which China also had in the East China Sea 2 years back. So what does this mean? Like, a lot of security officials already foresaw this as early as last year, but will we see this actually happening this year?
That is the greatest risk. It is not only a problem for the Philippines, but it's also a problem for our own neighboring countries. It's a main trade route, shipping, but also a main airline route.
Right.
Can you imagine all commercial flights passing through this area and asking permission from China? And they will have that capacity because as they transform some of this reclaimed area into this type of facilities. So it's a danger really to the movement of people, the movement of commerce, the free movement of people and commerce in the region.
I guess the question of many people, you know, like a lot of these incidents of aggression of China, you know, threatening fishermen previously or taking over Scarborough Shoal and now this reclamation and building military facilities. What can countries like the Philippines and Vietnam do? You know, beyond protesting, filing diplomatic protests, what can be done?
We have done what we can do as a nation that really has very limited defense capabilities. And given the reality of our own geography, we are an archipelago, and the South China Sea, or what we call the West Philippine Sea, needs really a lot of investment in terms of AFP or capabilities for external defense.
Right.
So what can we do? It takes time for us to build what the military calls the minimum credible defense. I think we need to really strengthen our own alliances with key nations who are interested in the free movement of people, commerce in the South China Sea. I'm referring not only to the United States, but also to Japan,
Australia,
and even Australia, and even our own ASEAN. Maybe it's time for ASEAN to realize that this is not an issue between the Philippines, Vietnam, or those claimant countries, but it's also an issue that might affect the trade of ASEAN, given as we enter this new ASEAN economic zone, South China Sea is a key trade route for all of us.
Right.
Imagine if it will be controlled by one country, and we need to ask for permission. It will basically alter how trade has been happening in our country.
You mentioned the trade route, impacts on trade as well. But if you look at it, it's not, well, the Chinese argument is we're not the only ones with facilities in the Spratly Islands, for example. Previously, there have been proposals for the Philippines to upgrade, say, its airstrip on Pag-asa Island,
Yes.
or like increase also its military facilities. But then again, it's very cautious of doing that because you have the US calling on all claimants to stop anything that would trigger
Because the
tension.
moment the Philippines reacts that way, let's build our own, let's rehabilitate our own facilities, then what you'll have is really a situation whereby all claimant countries, Vietnam and others, will start building facilities.
Okay.
And what do you have here? Again, you militarize the zones. Suddenly, the South China Sea becomes a very militarized area. And that's what I fear. Because, we live in an economic situation whereby people are saying, oh, it's the East Asian century, not only the
right.
China century. ASEAN will play an important role.
Yes.
China is there. Japan and Korea will play a role. Suddenly, our main trade route, our main airline route becomes a militarized zone because claimant countries, especially with China, given the reclamation in a few of these reefs turned into now islands, can really change how the relationship of people, and the fear that one simple accident, I'll use the word accident,
Right.
can trigger some big conflicts.
Okay.
And I fear that because we should live in a more peaceful, more rule-driven, because that's what the community of nations are telling us. The importance of international law,
Right.
respect for certain international agreements that we are part of, about economic zones, about respecting the sovereignty of countries. These are things that we should be looking at.
Earlier, you mentioned EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which is the Philippine military deal with the United States. Would you say that incidents like these test flights of China in the Spratly Islands highlight the urgency of having EDCA implemented, because we know that it's still pending with the Supreme Court for over a year now since it was signed?
I think so. There is that urgency, and that urgency is as far back as when it was signed. I think
Okay.
2014,
14, yeah.
April, late April of 2014. Why is it urgent? We have to accept the reality of the Philippines. We have concentrated on our internal security.
Right.
We have failed to build our capacity on external security, precedents after precedents, because there was really no threat. Suddenly, the Scarborough Shoal really woke up our government,
Okay.
and you set certain objectives. In this case, a credible defense posture, but it will take time. It will take a lot of resources. So I am supportive of what the government did. Build stronger relationship with Japan on one part, but nobody talks about that. No, but it's very important how Japan is helping us build our Coast Guard capability.
Right.
We went into a treaty with Australia in terms of visiting forces.
Right.
But a step further is really this proposal that we accepted and signed with the United States, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, that allows the United States to rotate forces in the Philippines, in Australia, in Japan, to help us build that minimum defense capability. A lot of people have asked, is the United States with us? And I find it funny that that question continues to be asked.
That's always asked.
Because the answer to that is they are with us because they offered us something. And that is the
Okay.
EDCA.
All right.
And it's us who is actually causing that doubt. Does the Philippines really want the United States support? Because we signed an agreement, we're ready to put
Implement.
some resources into it, to partner with the capability building program of the Philippine Armed Forces, but suddenly somebody files it in your court, and the court has not decided on it. And if you're the person trying to help, I'd say, are you really interested in help?
Okay.
But the good thing is that our government, in their statements, have said that this is very important.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, imagine the problem of the government defending massive spending in defense. But in this case, we don't need to spend because we can partner with some of our allies.
Okay. So speaking of allies like the US, there has been some criticism about its response. So for example, the consistency or frequency of freedom of navigation patrols, to send ships or planes to these disputed areas to show that the US does not recognize the claims of China. So how would you assess the US response to
The
the
past
dispute?
2015, we've seen some aggressiveness on their part, especially the middle part. I think I saw that in June, moving forward, some of the flights,
Right.
sending ships. But I think they are also, we have to accept also the reality that they cannot be that aggressive that could cause some conflict. And I think China is reading it well also. That,
Okay.
nobody really wants conflict in South China Sea.
Right.
But I think the United States, or even the statement, or even the actions of Australia when they sent a ship, I mean, right before the end of the year. So we need nations with capability to prove that there's really a freedom of navigation. That means
Okay.
ships can travel, nobody can stop them, or we should continue to encourage flights to pass through this, because there are existing standards or procedures already on commercial flights passing through here to prove that. And we have to, China said that they're not really controlling their
Yeah.
area. So I think we have to encourage everyone.
Okay. Let's shift now to the economic component of the relationship, which is the AIIB. So the Philippines, in late December, decides to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It was a last-minute decision right before the deadline, and some observers were surprised because initially President Aquino was hesitant.
Yes.
What do you think made him change his mind?
I think the acceptance that the best way to improve our relationship with China is to really separate
Okay.
the trade, the investment angle of our relationship with our territorial question or territorial conflict. And our government's decision to enter, to be part of the AIIB is a big step for us, really, to tell not only China but to the rest of the world that the Philippines have filed a complaint. We're there in The Hague.
Right.
We have defended ourselves, gave all our arguments there. But at the level of possible economic partnership, possible people-to-people improvement of relationship, the Philippines is here. We are respecting China and its initiative as something that will be helpful. As long as, I believe, and I see the government viewing it this way, as long as it follows international corporate governance practices. That means it will not be used really by China to create or exert more influence on smaller or underdeveloped or developing countries.
Okay.
But we have to see this as an opportunity whereby a new facility for development financing, especially in the area of infrastructure, where the Philippines needs a lot of help, is a positive step because it can help us address some of these needs.
So you mentioned that. Let's go to what are the concrete benefits, of joining the AIIB?
I think
what particular projects?
the details are not yet there.
Okay.
I think they need to convene. Member countries need to contribute their own share. But the idea itself of an Asian financial institution, development institution, focusing on infrastructure, which is normally the challenge to any developing countries because it's very expensive. It's a big investment. It has a big effect on the national budget with regards to competing with social investments on one hand. So here comes a facility that I think not only the Philippines can benefit, but can allow other developing countries to benefit from, especially, as I've said, if it's defined as somewhat with a sole objective of improving the infrastructure facilities, improving the investment potentials of countries.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, this kind of economic activity is the greatest foundation for me, for national security. Imagine if you have more investments.
Right.
If you have more foreign investments, how can there be conflict when there are intra-country trade
relations.
intra-country investment opportunities. So, positive, I think, but it remains to be seen.
Okay.
You just hope
too early.
China will not use it to dictate on smaller countries.
Okay.
That there are a lot of, would say, colatilia here and there. So we have to just be big step, but worry maybe and be conscious of how it will be executed when they start formally the AIIB.
So you mentioned a lot of considerations, like to see if it meets international standards. Or how do you think the concern of the Philippines, voiced by President Aquino early on, that the bank might be used as a political tool? You know, he cited previous corruption-tainted projects that the Philippines had with China, North Rail, the ZTE deal. And he said that at around after the Scarborough Shoal standoff in 2012, China canceled a loan. So these kinds of fears that China might use the bank for political ends, especially since we have a dispute with China.
Then it will not really become an important tool to any government. I am referring to, we know that this government is in its last 6 months. So why will the next administration use this if it will simply be a tool to impose on the Philippines as a weak member or a smaller member? But me, I've always believed that the president cannot single out China as a culprit to the corruption of North Rail and City.
Right.
I think
Takes
it's
two to tango.
I think it's the other way around.
Okay.
My personal view there is that it's possible that these were clean programs, projects that was seen as an opportunity by some individuals, because we all know that these were the years of the previous government when
the Arroyo
administration, whereby there seems to be an openness to this kind of activities using development assistance. Can you imagine using development assistance for your corrupt ways? So I don't blame China for that.
Okay.
Maybe they wanted to reach out to us, but it's the way we manage it. So it depends on the next government when AIIB functions. If there, and I think we have seen this past 6 years that people demand more transparency and accountability.
Right.
Maybe it depends also on us, the public, to see to it that a lot of these institutions that the government enters into, goes into agreements, financially in this case, are really transparent, accountable, and will not be used by certain political leadership in our country for their own motive, corrupt motives, and even because of that allows China to dictate on us, because that's a possibility in exchange. Now, I'm hoping it does not happen, because it defeats the purpose of what infrastructure and investment.
The benefits.
Yes. It's meant, we have seen studies after studies that one of the weakest area of the Philippines is infrastructure.
Right. Even the Aquino administration.
And infrastructure takes a lot of time for it to really have its effect. So can you imagine if you will suddenly waste it again on corrupt activities? If you will allow, or China allows itself, that this kind of resources will be used for this purpose. So at the end of the day, it will not only affect our relationship nation to nation, but also it will affect our own perception towards China.
Okay.
That you created an institution that was meant to corrupt us, which I don't think so.
But do you think that the Philippines being part of the 57 initial members of the bank, does that somewhat ease our relations with China? We've all admitted that the past years, the relations have been very tense. Some say it's like at the worst point because of the South China Sea dispute. Does this now provide an avenue to improve relations with China?
It does. We basically opened the year with that kind of avenue.
Okay.
I agree with where the government stand that after the Scarborough Shoal incident in 2012, the government needed to make a stand on the sovereignty over some of these islands that has always been considered as ours. But this opportunity of joining the AIIB tells China and the whole world that the Philippines is open to be friends with China.
Okay.
The territorial issue is separate. We cannot move backward. Cases were filed. We have presented our evidences. but can we now move forward in terms of building a relation and respecting each other's views and stands on territorial sovereignty issues.
Okay. Looking forward to the year ahead, in 2016, we have a lot of major developments that we're expecting. One is the ruling of the arbitral tribunal on our case against China. How do you see this impacting relations, especially now with all these different factors in place?
It's a possibility that this decision will come out when there's a new government.
Okay, after the elections.
After the elections.
After the May elections.
So it's possible that there's a new leader or there is an incoming government already. So we cannot really move backward, and a new government cannot suddenly say, oh, that's the decision of the previous government. It should not. I think it will be a great injustice to the Filipino people. And we have seen the support of the Filipino people. I've seen studies that show that China is the least trusted among countries because of this issue in South China Sea.
Among Filipinos.
Among Filipinos. I've seen studies that shows that the Filipinos really value, great majority of Filipinos, more than 80-85%, see that it was the right thing to do, to defend,
file a case.
to file a case. So what do I expect? I expect whoever that president is to continue this stance. But maybe after this, we have gone through the route of international law, the so-called rule of law argument. We win there, then maybe it's also the AIIB, the first step there that we did at the end of this 2015 is an opportunity to tell China also that, look, if I'm a new government, you cannot set aside what we have done, the previous government, but now it's time to improve. I'll use the word, maybe improve on our economic diplomacy.
Okay.
Let's build more economic ties, more trade, more investment, and if there are possible official development assistance, as long as it conforms to what we call, very good governance,
standards,
as not as the way we have seen the CTE, National Broadband Deal, or the North Rail, then maybe we can see a better relationship between our nation and China.
Speaking of the elections, if you look at the current crop of presidential candidates, some have been openly supportive of improved trade relations with China. You see the Vice President Binay, Senator Grace Poe saying they will pursue the case, the arbitration case, but they want better trade ties with China. Like, do you see, regardless of who wins, do you see a shift in foreign policy with regard to China?
I think the shift that we will see is that first shift is that we have to accept that the government cannot, whoever that government is, Poe or Binay, cannot suddenly change its path.
Okay.
But the shift is what's wrong really with stronger economic ties with China. Especially that even in this government, our own diplomacy, our own foreign policy, we have never really said that we are not for stronger ties with China. It's China who has reacted negatively with the actions of our government. But one thing that I'd like to point out, and I've noticed this, I think it would be the first time since 1946 that foreign policy might be part of the election debate. Why?
Okay.
Because candidates need to define themselves in front of the Filipino people, where they stand vis-a-vis China.
Right.
Not because you are for economic ties, you might suddenly say, oh, economic ties is more important than sovereignty. I think our Filipino voters will not treat that kind of position by any presidential candidate positively. So that means as a strong support or following the path of this current government is something that might challenge some candidates, especially if they're playing with campaign words in terms of what does it mean with economic ties? Does it mean sacrificing our strong stand and claim on the sovereignty of some of these islands that we have claimed for the past decades?
What would be your assessment so far of the five candidates?
I've seen some of their positions evolve.
Okay.
I think maybe
cite examples.
no. Initially, there was I never really doubted the vice president because I saw his statements and monitored the statements when he visited the United States in the CSIS.
Yeah, he delivered a speech.
He delivered a speech. It was he had a clear stand on issues, and I think we realized also that after that issue, it's possible that there was an attempt to make him soften on that issue. But he's back to where he was. That, we have to defend what is ours also.
Okay.
But again, I think he even supports publicly EDCA. So not necessarily, let's not really for China, but for the minimum defense, credible defense posture of our own country vis-a-vis not specific country. So, and also I think that statement of Senator Grace Poe, that there was a time she was softening on things, but when she came up with her 20-point agenda, she said that she will defend what is ours. I mean, so these are clear foreign policy postures. Surprisingly, somebody that I've not here really come up with a strong statement is Secretary Mar Ross. So maybe we're simply assuming that he is with the president. He will continue, but
not necessarily.
But in terms of statement,
we haven't heard.
I have not heard. I have not monitored. Of course, Mayor Duterte has not really focused on foreign policy issue. Senator Miriam, it's surprising that she's even putting a roadblock on.
She's anti-EDCA.
Anti-EDCA without really. It has nothing to do with Philippine sovereignty. It's really about strengthening our military capability using existing alliances.
Okay.
So I'm surprised with that.
All right.
But I think at the end of the day, these are candidates for running for public office. How they perceive the public views this issue will shape the way they stand.
Okay.
That's the reality of Philippine politics.
That's politics for you.
Yeah, it's not strong ideology. So I think at the end of the day, it depends on the Filipino voters themselves defining where we stand. And as I've said, I wear a hat as a political scientist, and we value studies, and I've seen quantitative studies, that means surveys and polls telling us the Philippines is with this government.
Okay.
That's why when you look at the continuing relatively high rating of the president, trust and performance and satisfaction, I always tell people, I think his strong stance vis-a-vis our sovereignty on these islands, that he could have simply said, China is big, I surrender. But no, in this case, he made a stand. He said, I will defend what is ours. Has continued to put that positive view by our own Filipino public, our Filipino citizens, with regards to President.
Okay. Last question. So where do you see Philippine-China relations in 2016?
I hope it will be better. I hope China accepts the rule of law, international rule of law, because I think as a small country, the only thing we can hang on, our great equalizer in this world driven by superpowers or great powers, is actually international law.
Right.
So we're holding on to that. I hope China respects that. Or as we move forward, we don't see a deterioration of situation in the South China Sea. That it can open up opportunities really for better economic, diplomatic relations, people-to-people relations between China and the Philippines.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's our
Thank you.
conversation with Dean Domanhit of the Albert Del Rosario Institute. I'm Aiib. Thank you for joining us.